This is a sports catastrophe production. Ugh. Hey there, hi there, ho there. It's Jeff Cutter, and I welcome you to another sports catastrophe on this day. And on this day, March the 4th, in the year 1976, it was official. Bob Lowry had bought the San Francisco Giants. Hey, on a minute. Why am I doing something based on that, you may ask? Well, there was the little thing about the fact that the San Francisco Giants nearly ended up leaving San Francisco for Toronto. I'm in Toronto. Anyway, the Toronto Blue Jays were not around. Toronto was looking to be a major league squad as early as 1973. They wanted to give Toronto a pro baseball team because, after all, Montreal had a team and was Canada's team. So Toronto got a little envious. After all, Montreal and Toronto are always rivals. So Paul Godfrey said he wants Toronto to be Warriors Baseball Club. So under his own dime, he attended MLB's winter meetings to network with movers and shakers. And he talked to Bowie Kuhn, the commissioner. And the commissioner put the arm around Godfrey's shoulder and said, "Son, where are you gonna play in Toronto if we give you a team?" I said, "You give me a team, I'll get you a stadium built." And he goes, "Son, let me tell you how baseball works. First, you build a stadium, and then we decide if we're gonna give you a team." So obviously they didn't know what to do about a stadium and all that. Godfrey was hoping to do it, and the Bats would like to have a motivation in the venture because the profile and all that. Labatt and Molson always fighting it out. Labatt is Toronto, Molson is Montreal. So anyway, Labatt wanted to help. And in 1975, there was a chance they could get a team. And San Francisco was having issues. Now, if you know the history of the San Francisco Giants, before 1976, you know that the Giants played in the famous Polo Grounds as the New York Giants from 1883. Yes, I know this was before the modern era, but whatever. To 1957. Of course, the stadium was dilapidated. They couldn't find room for another stadium. The neighborhood was falling flat, and the New York Giants wanted to move to Minneapolis because that's where their farm club would be, and they had this nice stadium called Metropolitan Stadium. Sadly, though, that fell through, and the Giants would move west to San Francisco, mostly because their internal rivals, the Brooklyn Dodgers, were moving to Los Angeles. So you have two teams in California, and that's the best thing to do if you're the Giants, because then baseball teams, when they have to go on road trips to California, can play both teams at the same time instead of having to go to California for one series and then have to fly back to the central eastern part of the United States. Anyway, it looks like everything. And then San Francisco had this poor stadium called Candlestick, which was built in the worst possible location because the surveyors actually picked the wrong day to find out where they could put the park. So of course San Francisco was doing decent. They had some hot mark. The 1960s were hot for the San Francisco Giants. They didn't win the title, but 62 they were close. If it wasn't for William McCovey's line drive being 2 feet too small for, if it was 2 feet over Bobby Richardson's grasp, game over. Giants win the World Series. But no, that didn't happen. Anyway, McCovey's thing was there. The Giants were good, but the attendance was poor. Also helped out by that fact, the San Fran problems was Oakland across the bay actually had a team that three-peated thanks to Charlie Finley's way of breaking baseball's bold and stiff upper lip. So San Fran was in dire need, and Toronto could have picked up the San Francisco Giants. This was huge and all that. The Giants had an aftermath. They had baseball's lowest attendance numbers for years. And it looked like, San Francisco would be moving to Toronto. So, of course, they would have to expand Exhibition Stadium, Toronto's fake stadium, which was held for the Argos and for many Grey Cups. So that's what they had to do. It looked like San Francisco would relocate and Toronto looked good. Toronto wanted the Cleveland Indians to move, and with Cleveland in the mid '70s being so terrible, I'm surprised they didn't. And it looked like Baltimore would move to Canada, although that was a great that would have been a terrible idea. Baltimore was decent in the '70s, so it looked like they got the San Francisco infrastructure. They got the move in January 1976. They were happy. The Jays were looking to be sold, and they got it. But that's CIBC and Globe and Mail had the thing. And it looked like the MLB would move the team to Toronto. Sadly, though, the new mayor of San Francisco, George Moscone, was elected the day before the Giants were to be sold. And he wanted the Giants to stay in the Bay Area. So in his first few days of office, he got an injunction to prevent the city of Toronto from getting the Giants. So basically, it was terrible. The injunction bought enough time for Bob Lowry on March the 4th, 1976 to buy the Giants and all that. Despite the fact the Bats wanted to buy it for $13.5 million American, the courts allowed Lowry to purchase the Giants for $8 million and keep them in the Bay Area. That's what we call hometown signing or something like that. I don't know what the saying was. Or leaving money on the table. A hometown discount, I mean. So Toronto was pissed off, really pissed off, too. However, Toronto's misery would not last long, as the American League had an issue with the fact that Seattle, the city of Seattle, was upset over the fact that MLB took their team away from them and moved them to Milwaukee to become the Brewers in 1970. The Seattle Pirates lasted 1 year. I mean, they had terrible ownership, a terrible stadium, and terrible finances. So Seattle had some injunction and threatened to sue. So the state of Washington was going to sue MLB, so MLB did the best thing possible. Give them an expansion team to make them shut the fuck up. So that's what they did. But the question on everyone's lips is, you can't just have one team in the American League. You got to add another to make it a 14-team league and make it even. So the powers that be in baseball decided, hey, you know what? Let's let there be a second team. Washington was favored to get it. They almost got the San Diego Padres, but thankfully, though, Ray Kroc, the guy from McDonald's, bought the team in 1974. So Toronto wasn't much of a player. However, Toronto did have the backing of one key owner of the American League squad. That was Ewing Kauffman, the owner of the Kansas City Royals, because Ewing Kauffman had the foresight to marry Muriel Kauffman. And where's Muriel from? You guessed it, Toronto, and she had a baseball background. So Mrs. Kauffman told her husband about the values of Toronto and maybe putting a team there. So Ewing Kauffman did all he could to give Toronto the second expansion team, even though Bowie Kuhn probably wanted it in Washington. Fuck off, Billy. You're my bitch now. Anyway, so Toronto did get their franchise in mid-1976, became the Blue Jays, started playing with Seattle in 1977 in the American League, and didn't look back. Pair of World Series titles later. The Giants would suffer through mediocrity still, even though, they avoided San Francisco. San Francisco avoided losing their team. I mean, the fans weren't really there, too. The Giants had some good playoff pushes, and in 1989 they got to the World Series, but got swept by Oakland. And that's not mentioned the whole earthquake shit. And as for Moscone, sadly though, 2 years later he would be assassinated alongside Harvey Milk by a city councilor. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but basically it was a terrible assassination just because Moscone was helping people with gay rights and all that. Now remember, things were a whole lot different in the late 70s than the 2020s. I know, yes, there's some LGBTQ2 plus bashing, but the fact of the matter is it was a whole lot worse and a whole lot sanctioned. Look at the HIV and AIDS epidemic and how the fact that, they thought that it was homosexuality and all that. Kind of stupid, don't you think? Reagan, what were you thinking? Anyway, I'm Jeff Diamond. I do.